persons were not expecting to be here today, and we're very appreciative that as parliamentarians, at a moment's notice, we gather for Parliament. I would like to extend special welcome to those who are joining us online via the various social media platforms, PBC JISTV, and those who are here in the gallery. I know we have many people online. Broughton Primary School, it's Broughton, all the way from Westmoreland. You are coming a far way today to pay attention to the proceedings of Parliament, and I see your Member of Parliament down there waving, so I know where you're from. It's a pleasure to have you in Parliament, all 50 students and your 4 teachers. I hope you will find today's sitting very educational and very interesting and engaging. It's a pleasure to have you here. Welcome. Call of the roll.
Mr. Bartlett, Mr. Holness, Dr. Clark, Dr. Chang, Ms. Grange, Mr. McKenzie, Mr. Chuck, Dr. Tufton, Mrs. Williams, Mr. Vaz, Mrs. Malawu Fort, Mr. Charles, Mr. Green, Mr. Morgan, Mr. Warmington, Mr. Mean, Mrs. Cuthbert Flynn, Mr. Terry Long, Dr. Dunn, Mr. Hutchinson, Mr. Witter, Ms. Smith, Mr. Davis, Mr. Brown, Dr. Brown-Burke, Dr. Charles, Mr. Chin, Mr. Clark, Mr. Cousins, Ms. Crawford, Ms. Daly, Ms. Davis, Mr. Golding, Mr. Graham, Dr. Guy, Ms. Hamilton, Ms. Hannah, Mr. Henriquez, Mr. Henry, Mr. Hilton, Mr. Jackson, Mr. Lawrence, Ms. Lee, Mr. Miller, Mr. Montague, Ms. Morrison, Mrs. Nita Garvey, Mr. Paulwell, Mr. Phillips, Dr. Phillips, Mr. Robertson, Mr. Robinson, Mr. Samuda, Mr. Shaw, Mr. Miller, Mr. Siblist, Mr. Slowly, Mrs. Vaz, Dr. Wheatley, Mr. Williams, Mr. Wilson, and Mr. Wright.
Statement by ministers. Announcements.
Laid on the table of the House today are the following: the Public Procurement, Registration and Classification of Suppliers Amendment Regulations 2023 and its resolution under the Public Procurement Act, the Civil Service Establishment General Amendment Order 2023 under the Civil Service Establishment Act and its resolution, the Jamaica Gazette Supplement, Proclamations, Rules and Regulations, number 146, volume 146, number 142, dated Thursday, June 22, 2023, proclamation number 13 of 2023, under the Constitution of Jamaica. The Jamaica Gazette Supplement, Proclamations, Rules and Regulations, volume 146, number 143, dated Thursday, June 22, 2023, number 194, which are enclosed the emergency powers, parishes of St. James and Westmoreland Regulation 2023 under the Emergency Powers Act. Thank you.
House Leader. Bills brought from the Senate, petitions, papers, reports from committees, notices of motions given orally. Minister, hold a moment, please. No. House Leader, in ensuring good order, would you be so kind as to notify which minister will speak? First, second, third, going through.
Madam Speaker, on the notices of motions given orally, the Minister of Education.
Thank you.
And she will be followed by the Minister of Finance. Thank you.
Thank you, House Leader.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Let me join in welcoming students from Broughton Primary School all the way in Westmoreland. We're here in Parliament this afternoon, yes. And they come on a good day because this afternoon I am more than pleased to be laying in Parliament amendment to the Child Care Protection Act to repeal Section 24 of the Act. Madam Speaker, the National Children's Registry received...
On a point of order, Madam Speaker, I thought we were...
It is okay. It is okay.
Okay.
Thanks. Minister, expectation is that you would first give notice. We are at notices of motion given orally.
Madam Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, I will move to introduce and have read a first time a bill shortly entitled the Child Care and Protection Amendment Number 2 Act 2023.
Thank you, Minister. We will then take at notices of motion given orally, Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, I'll move the following motion. The Civil Service Establishment Act, the Civil Service Establishment General Order 2023 Resolution. Whereas Section 3, subsection 1 of the Civil Service Establishment Act, hereinafter referred to as the Act, provides that, subject to the provisions of the Constitution of Jamaica relating to the holders of public offices and of the Act, the Minister may, by order, continue or abolish offices in the public service. And whereas Section 3, subsection 2 of the Act provides that an order made under Section 3 of the Act may from time to time A, determine the numbers of any office specified thereunder, B, determine the emoluments attached to any office, and C, make such incidental, consequential, and supplemental provisions as the Minister thinks necessary or expedient to give full effect to the order, And whereas Section 3, subsection 3 of the Act provides that an order under Section 3 of the Act may provide that it shall have effect from such date not earlier than the first day of February 1976 as may be specified therein. And whereas Section 3, subsection 4 of the Act provides that an order made under Section 3 of the Act shall be subject to affirmative resolution of the House of Representatives. And whereas on this, the 27th day of June 2023, the Minister made the Civil Service Establishment General Amendment Order 2023, now therefore be it resolved as by this Honourable House as follows. This resolution may be cited as the Civil Service Establishment General Amendment Order 2023 Resolution. 2. The Civil Service Establishment General Amendment Order 2023 Resolution, which was laid on the table of the House on the 27th day of June 2023, is affirmed. And, Madam Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, I'll move the following motion. The Bauxite and Alumina Industries Encouragement Act, the Bauxite and Alumina... Oh, sorry, I should have, before I go on to that, Madam Speaker, I should say, Madam Speaker, with respect to the Civil Service Establishment General Order 2023, I should have concluded, Madam Speaker, by begging to give notice that at a later stage today, I will move for the suspension of the standing order to enable me to take this motion. Now, moving on to the Bauxite Alumina Industries Encouragement Act and the Bauxite, Alumina and Alumina Industries Encouragement Relevant Concession Period Order 2023 Resolution. Whereas by virtue of Section 7, subsection 1 of the Bauxite and Alumina Industries Encouragement Act, hereinafter referred to as the Act, no customs duty or other similar impost shall be payable in respect of the importation into Jamaica of petroleum fuel, except petrol, fuel oil or diesel oil during the relevant concession period if such petroleum fuel or such oil is imported, A, by any recognized bauxite producer for the purpose of being used in the wining, treating, transporting in Jamaica and shipping of bauxite. It's not the mining, treating, or transport of Jamaica in Jamaica of bauxite. Winning. Thank you, member. B, by any recognized alumina producer for the purpose of manufacturing, transporting in Jamaica, and shipping of alumina manufactured from bauxite, one in Jamaica. And whereas by virtue of Section 7, subsection 2 of the Act, the relevant concession period means the period prescribed as such by the Minister by order, subject to affirmative resolution of the House of Representatives. And whereas the Bauxite and Alumina Industries Encouragement Relevant Concession Period Order 2019 was made subject to affirmative resolution and prescribed the concession period as the first day of July 2018 to the 30th day of June 2023. And whereas it is desirous to prescribe such other date in order to further extend the relevant concession period to continue to facilitate the development of bauxite resources and the encouragement and expansion of the alumina industry in Jamaica. And whereas on the 13th day of June 2023, the Minister made the Bauxite and Alumina Industries Encouragement Relevant Concession Period Order 2023 prescribing such other date. And whereas it is desirable that the Bauxite and Alumina Industries Encouragement Relevant Concession Period Order 2023 be affirmed by resolution. Now, therefore, be it resolved by this Honourable House as follows. 1. This resolution may be cited as the Bauxite and Alumina Industries Encouragement Relevant Concession Period Order 2023 Resolution. And 2. The Bauxite and Alumina Industries Encouragement Relevant Concession Period Order 2023, which was laid on the table of the House on the 20th day of June 2023, is hereby affirmed. Madam Speaker, I further beg to give notice that at a later stage today, I'll move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take this motion. And Madam Speaker, there is one more. Well, two more. Madam Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, I'll move the following motion. The Public Procurement Act. The Public Procurement Registration and Classification of Suppliers Amendment Regulations 2023 Resolution. Whereas Section 61, subsection 1D of the Public Procurement Act, hereinafter referred to as the Act, provides that the Public Procurement Commission may, with the approval of the Minister, make regulations prescribing the forms, fees, and procedures for the registration or classification of suppliers. And whereas Section 61, subsection 2 of the Act provides that regulations made under Section 61, subsection 1 shall be subject to affirmative resolution. And whereas on the 12th day of June 2023, the Commissioner, with the approval of the Minister, made the Public Procurement, Registration and Classification of Suppliers Amendment Regulations 2023, and whereas it is desirable that the Public Procurement, Registration and Classification of Suppliers Amendment Regulations 2023 be affirmed, now therefore be it resolved by this Honourable House as follows. 1. This resolution may be cited as a Public Procurement, Registration and Classification of Suppliers Amendment Regulations 2023 resolution. And 2. The Public Procurement, Registration and Classification of Suppliers Amendment Regulations 2023, which is laid on the table of the House on the 27th day of June 2023, is affirmed. And, Madam Speaker, thank you, Madam Speaker.
House Leader, Minister Vaz walked in. I'm not sure if...
Madam Speaker, we will recommit on the announcements, but for the time being, we could move on the agenda. Thank you.
Questions and answers to questions.
Madam Speaker, I table some questions to the Prime Minister which are overdue for answer, and my colleagues have also tabled questions which are at least 2 months overdue. I would like a commitment from the Acting House Leader as to when these outstanding questions that have been tabled will be answered. Because we're going 6 weeks, we're almost at recess, and we're going to have a break without the questions being answered.
House Leader.
Yes, Madam Speaker, I cannot commit to a specific date, but I will ensure that the questions are answered in the shortest possible time. I will make every effort. Thank you.
Motions that may be made at the commencement of public business requiring notice, motions relating to the sitting of the House, motions for leave to introduce bills, presentation of bills without leave of the House first obtained. Minister Williams.
Madam Speaker, I now move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take the first reading of a bill shortly entitled the Child Care and Protection Amendment Number 2 Act 2023.
Members, the question is that the standing orders be suspended to allow the Minister to take the first reading of the bill. Those in favour? Those in favour? Those against? The ayes have it. Minister?
Madam Speaker, I now move that a bill shortly entitled the Child Care and Protection Amendment Number 2 Act 2023 be read a first time.
Clerk.
A bill shortly entitled the Child Care and Protection Amendment Number 2 Act 2023 read a first time.
Minister.
Madam Speaker, I beg to give notice of second reading of the bill.
Yeah, we don't know. Where did the paper go? Public business. House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Under public business, the Minister of Finance will take the Bauxite and Alumina Encouragement Order 2023 and the Civil Service Establishment General Amendment Order 2023.
Marshall or orderly. The box, please, for Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, House Leader. I'll first, Madam Speaker, deal with the Civil Service Establishment General Order 2023. So, Madam Speaker, I now move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take the motion, notice of which I gave earlier.
Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. Minister?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, in accordance with the Civil Service Establishment Act of 1976, the Civil Service Establishment General Order of 2023 has been prepared and is presented to indicate changes to the Civil Service Establishment General Order of 2023. Madam Speaker, the Civil Service Establishment General Order of 2023, you'll recall, was tabled in the House of Parliament just a few weeks ago. And it outlines the reorganization of ministries and departments consequent on the creation of new posts, the abolition of previous posts, and the reclassification, upgrading, and retitling of existing posts. Madam Speaker, the major changes to be effected in the Civil Service Establishment General Order of 2023, the one that we're dealing with today, is the newly created position of Supernumerary Permanent Secretary with effect from June 28, 2023. This post has been created based on the court ruling following the case of Dean Roy Ralston Bernard, who was a claimant in that case, and the Public Service Commission, who was the first defendant, and the Attorney General of Jamaica, who was the second defendant, and the Jamaica Civil Service Association, who was listed as an interested party. The court made the following declarations. 1, Dean Roy Bernard is the holder of the office of Permanent Secretary. 2, the action of the Public Service Commission constitutes procedural ultra vires in failing to ensure that the position of Permanent Secretary was added to the Civil Service Establishment Order 2019 for the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service before effecting the transfer of the claimant from the Ministry of Education to the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service. The Public Service Commission also failed, it was found by the court, to afford the opportunity of a hearing to the claimant, having transferred him to an office which was not that of a permanent secretary. Madam Speaker, this amendment to the Civil Service Establishment Order is to ensure that the will of the court is adhered to in all future transfers of the positions of permanent secretaries. So, Madam Speaker, if I may, in this case, Mr. Bernard was a permanent secretary in the Ministry of Education. He was transferred to the Ministry of Finance. Prior to his transfer, the establishment only had a financial secretary, a post of Director General, but there's no post of permanent secretary. Therefore, Mr. Bernard would not have been a permanent secretary in the ministry. The purpose of this order is, which I'll get to in more detail, the court has ruled that Mr. Bernard is a permanent secretary, and if he's to be transferred, he has to retain the features of that office. So, Madam Speaker, just to note, as I've done when discussing previous orders, the Post Operations Committee of the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service, which comprises members from the Ministry, Office of the Services Commission, the Jamaica Civil Service Association, continues to meet regularly to review the civil service establishment, including considering requests and comments from the various ministries, departments, and agencies. This is done with the objective of improving the efficiency of the establishment as well as the delivery of service to the nation. So, Madam Speaker, in this specific instance, as the order makes clear, Madam Speaker, not the order. That's being tabled makes clear. In this instance, Mr. Bernard is being transferred to the Ministry of Culture, Entertainment and Sport in the newly created capacity upon passage of this order of a supernumerary permanent secretary. What it means, Madam Speaker and members, the Jamaica's laws, the Financial Administration and Audit Act and other ancillary acts recognizes one accounting officer per ministry, and that is the permanent secretary. The supernumerary permanent secretary has the position of permanent secretary, with the exception that that person is not an accounting officer. So this is not the first time in the history of Jamaica that the position of supernumerary permanent secretary will have existed. It has existed in the past, and we are merely recreating such a position so that the particular circumstances here we are creating a position in order to honor the ruling of the court, given the fact that all ministries already have permanent secretaries. There's no ministry with a vacant permanent secretary. So the way to abide by the ruling of the court is for the position of supernumerary permanent secretary, which once existed in the past, to be established, to be included in the establishment, and in this specific case, with respect to the Ministry of Culture, Entertainment and Sport, where he'll join that ministry, and the minister has already in mind the segregation of duties that that she can speak to. But the point to note is that the supernumerary will not be the accounting officer for that ministry. Madam Speaker, I ask that this Honourable House approves the Civil Service Establishment General Order 2023.
I just have some questions in relation to the motion. First of all, the newly created position, does that permanent secretary report to the minister? You have indicated that you would still have an accounting officer who is the named permanent secretary. What is going to be the relationship between the permanent secretary, who is the accounting officer, and the supernumerary permanent secretary, that position which has just been created? And does the supernumerary permanent secretary operate at the same level in terms of emoluments as the permanent secretary? And what would that reporting relationship be? Right now, my understanding in the Ministry of Education, we have, is it one permanent secretary and two acting permanent secretaries? I just want clarity on that. How many permanent secretaries exist in the Ministry of Education?
Thank you, Member, for those questions, which affords an opportunity to clarify. The supernumerary permanent secretary reports to the minister. The permanent secretary also reports to the minister. The permanent secretary, however, is the accounting officer, and so duties that, which is a substantial responsibility, and therefore duties that have a bearing on the responsibility of accounting officer lie squarely in the portfolio of the permanent secretary. What will happen in this and in other cases is that the supernumerary permanent secretary will have very specific duties that the minister will outline to the supernumerary permanent secretary, and on those duties the supernumerary will report to the minister. But anything to do with what an accounting officer has responsibility for, the permanent secretary is responsible. With respect to the emoluments, the emolument of the supernumerary permanent secretary will be on the same scale, the same level 15 as the permanent secretary. The job, as the court ruled, the person is a permanent secretary, and therefore the emoluments, even though the title is called supernumerary permanent secretary, just to distinguish between the accounting officer, who a permanent secretary, but the emoluments are the same in the same level 15 band.
Yeah, I just want to understand. So at the Ministry of Education, is there a permanent secretary who is not acting in the post at the Ministry of Education right now?
Madam Speaker, the Minister of Education is here, and she just nodded to me that there's an acting permanent secretary in the Ministry of Education. There's not a confirmed permanent secretary, there's an acting permanent secretary. So
couldn't we have avoided this by putting Mr. Bernard back at the ministry for which he had responsibility for where there is an acting permanent secretary, and that person would revert back to their substantive post, rather than go through this process of creating a new position simply to deal with an issue which was handled badly from the beginning, where a permanent secretary was effectively demoted, which is what the court ruled against.
Through you, Madam Speaker, that would certainly have been an option, and there are several other options. He could have been moved to several other ministries. The government, in handling the business of the people, needs to pursue an option that it believes is in the best interest of the people. And in this instance, member, the acting permanent secretary is fairly advanced in a number of policies and programs that are of priority to the government and by virtue of the people of Jamaica. And in the interest of seeing those policies and programs through, having a disruption in the leadership, the administrative leadership of that ministry at this time would not be in the public interest. And therefore, a means of honoring the court decision has been found. The minister in the Ministry of Culture, Gender, Entertainment and Sport has a number of capital projects that she has pre-announced, and that they're, up to date, handling the operational aspects of the ministry and developing the capital program has been constraining, and it's therefore in the interest of advancing on some of those initiatives that the Ministry of Culture, Gender, Entertainment and Sport has, that having a senior person with experience at the level of a permanent secretary to be accommodated in that ministry is in the better interest overall.
I mean, I see we have created this thing to deal with the court ruling, but I believe we are setting up ourselves for confusion, because the supernumerary permanent secretary would have to have a reporting relationship to the permanent secretary who is the accounting officer, because there's no way that this person can be undertaking activities on behalf of the ministry, dealing with projects that involve government expenditure, without there being some reporting relationship to the accounting officer. So I think we are creating a structure which is bound to be not just confusing, but you will have duplication of roles and other challenges with this kind of relationship, which I think could be avoided if the person was reverted back to their substantive position.
Yeah, Madam Speaker, as member of Parliament, the member is entitled to his point of view, which we respect. The Ministry of Culture, Gender, Entertainment and Sport is a super ministry with multiple portfolios: culture, entertainment, gender, sport, sort of four broad areas of responsibility. And the supernumerary permanent secretary will have very specific portfolio responsibilities in the area of culture, entertainment, and the commemorative legacy projects, which is very distinct from the gender and sports element of the ministry. So, Madam Speaker, it is an arrangement that we have had in the past. It's just that it was not in the establishment order this time around. And, you know, we are a country of laws, and this parliament, this government respects the decisions of the court, Madam Speaker, and we're acting speedily and hastily, not speedily rather, to implement the decision of the court such that effective June 28, 2023, which is tomorrow, June 28, 2023, which is tomorrow, Mr. Bernard will be reinstated as a permanent secretary with a specific title, supernumerary permanent secretary, by virtue of the order that we are passing here today. Oh, I have another one. Yes, so Madam Speaker, I now move for the suspension of the standing orders. No, I'm sorry. Madam Speaker, I now ask that it be approved.
Yes, the question is that the motion be approved. Those in favour? Those against? The ayes have it. Minister Bauxite. Minister Bauxite.
Madam Speaker, with respect to the Bauxite and Alumina Industries Encouragement Order 2023, I further beg, Madam Speaker, or I now move rather for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take the motion, notice of which I gave earlier.
Those in favour? Those against? The ayes have it. Minister.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today to introduce the Bauxite and Alumina Industries Encouragement Relevant Concession Period Order 2023 and its resolution. Madam Speaker, this House is reminded that under Section 7 of the Bauxite and Alumina Industries Encouragement Act, a duty concession on the importation of petroleum fuel, fuel oil, except petrol, and diesel oil was granted for a prescribed date noted originally as the period November 1st, 1979 to December 31st, 1996. The Act further authorized the Minister to extend this prescribed date by order subject to an affirmative resolution of the House of Representatives. These orders extended the provision up to 2018. In 2018, a review was done by the Ministry of Finance and Public Service on the impact of the concession on the sector. It was noted that the bauxite industry continues to make a positive impact on the economy. However, the industry continues to need the concession in order to remain afloat, energy being a major component in the pricing of the final product. A policy decision was taken to extend the concession for an additional 5 years. Madam Speaker, an amendment was therefore made to the said Act to change the prescribed period to a relevant concession period expiring on June 30th, 2023. The Act allows for this concession period to be amended simply by issuing an order subject to affirmative resolution after a review of the needs of the industry, thus eliminating the need to embark upon an elaborate legislative changes going forward. It has been determined, Madam Speaker, that the sector continues to require the support provided by the concession of fuel, except petrol, which has been in place for the past 44 years. It has been determined, Madam Speaker, that the sector still requires that support, and a withdrawal of the benefit at this time would have grave financial implications and economic implications for Jamaica, inclusive of potential closures. Madam Speaker, in closing, please note that based on the government's move to utilize cleaner energy sources for all sectors, members are hereby given the assurance that the relevant engagement is ongoing to encourage the bauxite and alumina sector to reduce their dependence on the type of fuel being utilized. It will never be able to completely, given the the nature of renewables. But, Madam Speaker, we hope that over time the dependence on fuel oil will be reduced, which is in furtherance of our Vision 2030 goal for Jamaica to develop cost-efficient energy solutions for the bauxite and alumina industry. Madam Speaker, I now invite members of this Honourable House to affirm this resolution, which extends the concessions on fuel for the bauxite and alumina sector, first enacted in 1979 and continuously applied up until the current time, for this to continue to apply over the next, the period specified in the order, which is the next 5 years. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The question is that the motion be approved. Oh, sorry, my apologies.
Thank you very much, Madam
My
Speaker.
apologies.
Yes, this is an important resolution that the Minister has brought, and it is normally non-contentious because this is a facility that has been in place for many years, from the 70s, as part of the encouragement features of this industry. In fact, it extends to other industries. But there are some questions I wish for the Minister to answer. Firstly, when this encouragement was first given, it was recognized the importance of energy to the production of bauxite, but more so the production of aluminum. And it was to offset the cost of producing aluminum that this became a priority to the industry. But it wasn't meant to be in perpetuity, because one of the features of the Jamaica bauxite aluminum industry has been the fact that when prices are good, we are happy and we see revenues flowing in, we see maximum employment. When prices are bad, then the industry goes through this doldrum. And it is largely because the industry has not been able to achieve that level of efficiency where when the prices are bad, they can still survive and be in the tier 1 level. And so Jamaica has been going through, for these decades, periods when the industry is shut down. We had Alpart shut for 9 years, reopened recently, shut again for peculiar situation. But we've had these problems. And the first question is, Minister, where are we with the commitments of the companies to improve their efficiency level, primarily to reduce the high level of energy component to the production of aluminum? We know that Jamaica has moved to incorporate LNG. The others have remained with heavy fuel oil and diesel. I believe that if we're going to continue to provide these benefits, and these are benefits, they're not paying duty, then there must be some commitment, specific commitment within a time frame for this transformation to happen. Or else Jamaica is going to continue, unfortunately, to have these cycles of bust and boom in relation to this industry. So that's the first question. But I wish to raise a far more, for me, fundamental and important question, because mining has become a bad word. And it is not only so in Jamaica, but across the world. I'm convinced that we can't live without mining because we love to fly, we love to drive, we love our phones, and so on. But if Jamaicans believe that they are not getting the full benefits from this depleting resource known as bauxite, then you're going to have, as we are seeing, this growth, massive growth in dissatisfaction. Some of it due to the mining sector itself, because I believe that as a country, we have not done as well as we should in terms of some of the environmental issues, some of the commitments that were made at the outset to ensure that you have land rehabilitation and so on. But I am seeing more and more, Madam Speaker, that the Jamaican people are not getting the value, the money out of this industry, apart from the employment, and we concede that the jobs there are good jobs. But when you look at some of the ravages of the sector in some of these communities, I don't believe that the Jamaican people are getting the kind of investments, the kind of revenues that ought to come from this industry. Madam Speaker, we on this side, we have been at pains to criticize what has happened with the bauxite levy. There are two streams. In fact, there are three streams of revenues. One, there's a royalty that is paid on the raw bauxite. Then there's a bauxite levy. And then there's a third thing now that we have been critical of, and yes, it existed in our time, where we tax on profits. Jamaica operates on that, and lately the arrangements with Noranda is in relation to a tax on those profits. So the only company now that pays a bauxite levy is Windalco. JISTV Alpart is not in operation. They would have to pay the bauxite levy when it becomes applicable. We believe, Madam Speaker, that there ought to be a uniform application of the bauxite levy across the entire industry. That is the only way we are going to be able to maximize the revenues that ought to flow from the industry. And Minister, perhaps you could indicate, because in the budget recently, you had indicated a projection for revenues from the industry. My understanding is that that has been slashed significantly, because you're not getting anything much. And in fact, what you are getting from, say, Windalco are revenues that are outstanding, that have been outstanding for some time. And I don't see where you're getting current bauxite levy revenues. And that, Madam Speaker, in the context of an industry where there are these downside risks, we should be now maximizing every ounce of the benefit that we can get. Not to mention what we anticipate from the rare earth elements that we believe are present. And yes, the ministers have been speaking about it of late, but I don't see any planned program to get us to that stage. Minister, I had proposed last year in the sectoral debate that we should form a committee of members of parliament who represent communities where bauxite mining and alumina production, those communities that the investors are in, and that these members of parliament should come to you. You should be able to indicate, as we used to do from time to time through the Community Development Fund, the funds that's available out of the bauxite levy to do infrastructure work, improvements work, rehabilitation work, mitigation work, health issues, and for them to decide along with you where those resources are to be spent. Many of these MPs have to endure the criticism of their constituents in these areas because they are not seeing the benefits flowing. I was interested recently when there was an appeal made by the government in the courts that one of the arguments that convinced the court to remove the injunction was the benefits that flow from bauxite production, the fiscal benefit. And the argument was convincing. But whether is that, Mr. Minister, in light of what I believe now are reduced revenues, significant reduced revenues from the sector, how we're going to ensure that we maximize, again, the impact and effect of the bauxite levy. And as I pointed out recently, when I thought you had a golden opportunity to shift from the income tax regime with Jamaica and to move it back to a bauxite levy regime, I don't think you utilized that opportunity that would have come when the company came for approval of the sale from Noble to Glencore. I really believe we lost that opportunity. So, Minister, if you could just respond to that. I believe that we are not maximizing the benefits, and that's the reason why people are upset about this depleting resource, that we really ought to, at this stage, be seeing the upper levels of revenue flows rather than the mere trickle that we are seeing now. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Madam Speaker, you were quite generous. The member stood up to ask a question, and he was allowed to give a speech. I think it's because of your your personality and your demeanor. Credit to you. She allowed it. Right. So you remember, I'm here talking about the concession on fuel. You made a serious contribution there, member. I mean, first thing, which I'm grateful for the record, for the acknowledgement that mining is critically important to Jamaica's future. At this point in time, the macroeconomic and microeconomic benefits of the mining industry, broadly speaking, and let me even be more specific, of the bauxite alumina industry, are tremendous at this point in time. We still earn, by way of foreign exchange, in the region of $300 million a year from the bauxite alumina sector, which is crucial in maintaining the reserve levels that we have, that by extension allows Jamaica to be able to pay its bills as it becomes due. And also, very importantly, even as we make the observation that there are many industries in Jamaica where the level of employment is such that the incomes generated are not in the upper quartile of the income distribution in the country, the bauxite alumina sector stands as an outlier in that trend, in the sense that the bauxite alumina industry is the largest employer of technical skills in the country, engineers, maintenance officers, and so forth, and high valued employment, relatively speaking. And that is critical to our country. Now, speaking from the perspective of the Minister of Finance and the Public Service, with responsibility for the bauxite levy, there was a time in Jamaica, well, let us back up a bit. The mining sector, as you know, and as we all know, is a cyclical industry. Commodity prices move up and down according to the business cycle and in response to geopolitical developments. And there are phases along that cycle where the profitability of the sector will be compromised as the input prices go up. So the sector is a commodity sector as far as outputs are concerned, alumina and bauxite, but the input costs are also commodity related. The primary costs in the bauxite industry are fuel and caustic soda. And all four of those commodity prices move over the business cycle: bauxite, alumina, fuel, and caustic soda. And in many instances, they don't move in synchronization. They move in a way that is adverse to the financial interests of the sector. The recent period is such an example where, due to the economic impact of the war in Ukraine, we saw a softening of demand for, and the trade war with China, a softening of demand for aluminium, and therefore alumina. So prices for alumina fell at the same time as the input prices, being energy, rose. And that happens frequently, and it leads to tremendous financial pressure and indeed long periods of financial losses for companies in the sector. Now, related to that is the relative efficiency of the plants in a particular country. The more efficient the plant is, the better chance it has to ride out the peaks and troughs in the business and economic cycle as it concerns a particular sector. And the first part of your speech dealt with the efficiency of the sector, and your question, I believe, was what are we doing about making the sector more efficient? And that, respectfully, is a question more for the Minister of Mining, but I thought that you asked it in the context of energy, this order being related to energy. You rightly pointed out that at least one of the players in the industry has sought to move away from heavy fuel oil and has invested in LNG. But I will say to you, member, that in this current period, LNG is just as expensive as the fuel oil. So that diversification, would not have assisted your point, because the events that have occurred internationally have brought some amount of convergence in the prices of LNG and heavy fuel oil measured per energy unit. With respect to those companies investing in renewables, again, ministers of energy and mining are better placed to speak, but one would have to sort out the intermittency issues, battery storage, and so forth. Suffice to say, member, that Jamaica, which I have responsibility for, with the new owners of Jamaica, the government is committed to engage in an investment plan that is designed to bring Jamaica into the upper half of alumina producers in the world, measured by the efficiency of the output. So at least the ones that we have control over, we're doing that. Now, with respect to the levy specifically, I'll say to you, remember, that the most, and I don't have the documents in front of me, so I'm speaking here from memory, but there will come a time when we have a conversation just on the levy. But from my recollection, the most amount of levy paid in the last 10 years has been over the past 3 or 4 years. That is just a fact. So let us start from a positive position, that having the most amount has been over the last 3 or 4 years. The environment that we have today is one where the sector is under tremendous strain and under tremendous pressure with losses that are due to the conflation of factors I just described, of the prices of commodity inputs moving adversely to the prices of final outputs, which are moving down. Okay? But I would ask, member, that we defer the conversation on the levy to a point in time in the future when I assure you that we will have opportunity to delve into it in great detail. Okay? Today may not be the day for that, but I've done the best to respond to your presentation. With that, Madam Speaker, I ask that the order be approved.
The question is that the motion be approved. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. Thank you. House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Minister. At this time, Madam Speaker, I ask for the recommittal of 2 items, statements by ministers and announcement. Statements by ministers. Prime Minister, at this time, Madam Speaker, will make a statement. Thank you.
Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. Statement by Minister. Prime Minister.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the government recognizes the impact of urban decay and blight on the socio-economic fabric of the society and, of course, on our built environment and the associated ills that threaten sustainable development in many communities island-wide. Community renewal interventions provide a platform for the coordination and enhancement of the delivery of public services to volatile and vulnerable communities. Consequently, the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation has developed an urban renewal and development program as part of its mandate to strategically coordinate and implement urban renewal projects for the sustainable transformation of communities and towns across Jamaica. Regarding the foregoing, the Ministry will be working in tandem with members of Parliament as we progressively work to transform urban spaces. Therefore, I wish to advise the House that $4 million will be made available to all constituencies for the implementation of specific projects under Phase 1 of this urban renewal development program. The projects to be undertaken must focus on infrastructure, and these projects, Madam Speaker, will be zinc fence removal and replacement with approved materials. We are changing the face of our communities to remove unsightly fencing, park upgrading and creation of small what is called pocket parks, installation, replacement of street signs. Madam Speaker, the street signs must be with the approval of the municipal authority. And I know, Madam Speaker, it is now fashionable to put up signs at the entrances of communities, but this project is not designed to do that. This project is designed for street signs. It is for urban renewal, for communities where the street signs have been torn down or they have been worn out over time, to replace them. So, Madam Speaker, it's a very specific mandate for urban renewal. And of course, Madam Speaker, the paving of sidewalks and pathways. In some communities, this is absolutely important. Madam Speaker, the Ministry is working to develop a specific program which will be in Phase 2 of this general urban renewal, which will focus on constituencies that have extensive urban areas. So in this first phase, all constituencies will benefit because all constituencies have some element of urban areas in them. But in the next phase, we will be seeking to focus, which is the mandate of this department in the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation, to focus exclusively on constituencies that have urban areas. Madam Speaker, recently I had the opportunity to tour with the member from Western St. Andrew, his constituency, and we have similar constituencies. And the member mentioned that he would appreciate an allocation to remove the maze of zinc fences in the areas. And Madam Speaker, we went back, we looked at the budget, we figured out what we can do, and we are now making, it is admittedly a small allocation. It is admittedly a small allocation, $4 million. But Madam Speaker, it can remove zinc fences from a significant stretch of roads, each, per constituency. In the second phase, we will have, as I say, greater focus and possibly greater allocations. The intention, Madam Speaker, is to target communities and transform them. That's what I'm saying, Madam Speaker. So the first part of the program, as all members are elected equally, we distribute the funds to all constituencies. But as we are targeting from a policy perspective, which is urban renewal, then only urban constituencies, that would be constituencies that have a significant area as urban. In the same way, Madam Speaker, that we wouldn't target some rural urban constituencies with agricultural assistance, for example. So, no, so you will get in the first round, member, but in the second round, unless you are able to point out to us an area that could be considered urban. So, Madam Speaker, it is always difficult to do these kinds of allocations because all MPs would want the assistance, and I genuinely understand that. So, Madam Speaker, no, we will do rural as well, but this one is under the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation, under the Urban Renewal Department. Thanks for the advice. Madam Speaker, proposals. Madam Speaker, members of Parliament must submit a project proposal for outlining the location, rationale for selection, the estimated duration and the impact of the project. And these proposals are to be submitted to the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation by Friday, the 14th of July, 2023. A letter will be circulated as is the usual practice, so you will know where to send your projects. The Ministry's Urban Renewal and Development Branch will provide technical assistance, including evaluation of project proposals and site assessments. All projects must be completed within budget and only commence after assessment is conducted and approvals granted. Madam Speaker, the transformation of the physical and built environment in communities play a key role in social and economic transformation. It improves quality of life, fosters inclusivity and social equity, encourages community engagement, supports economic development, and promotes sustainable practices. By creating environments that are accessible, functional, and aesthetically pleasing, communities can enhance social well-being, equity, and resilience. Madam Speaker, I look forward to the implementation of this project and the impact, the positive impact it will have on lives in urban communities.
Opposition Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I think every MP would be pleased to have an additional $4 million to spend on the type of projects outlined here: zinc fence removal, park upgrading, community or street signs, and paving sidewalks and pathways. And we look forward to seeing what phase 2 will look like, the budget for it, and what types of activities will be permitted under it. As you know, Prime Minister, certainly, for example, in my constituency, we have a number of high-rise buildings, 3 different schemes, which were built many decades ago, and where the cladding around the staircases is collapsing, various other things which are affecting safety. And we really need to address those quickly, and I know you're working on that, so I want to thank you for that. But I'm sure, you know, for the urban MPs, there are many of us who have a lot of issues related to life in urban areas like that, which need to be quickly addressed. Not to say that the Phase 2 project would be able to address those kind of problems, but there are many other things that I'm sure will be identified, and we look forward to seeing and hearing more about the Phase 2 project. But, you know, we support zinc fence removal, and interesting to see how much one can deal with $4 million. But, you know, I'm sure that those who have their curtilages, their boundaries transformed from zinc to something more up-to-date, more visually appealing and safer, will be very grateful for it. So we are on board with this particular one, and thank you for thinking of the need to address this issue, having toured Western St. Andrew with my good colleague MP from that constituency. Thank you.
Madam Speaker, just a question to the Prime Minister. As with all the MPs, I believe that this is a welcome project and that it is more than needed. I don't think anyone could deny that. So I want to say it's well-timed and it's needed. I wanted to ask you, just in terms of the rollout, I know we're expecting a letter to do the details, but I'm sincerely hoping that this does not go the route of the $40 million road program, because I am totally unable to get any information about where we are, when we start, and all of that. No, I'm raising it. Madam Speaker, you would understand that I raise it because some people send me here, you know, and when they hear this big excitement in Parliament and they look and don't see me doing any roads at all and I can't tell them anything, then it seems as if I am derelict in my responsibility. And since this is the place where I come to lay those claims so that they are very clear, because they watch us, you know, on a Tuesday afternoon, they can actually see me talking to the Prime Minister to make sure that this program, which they are going to be anticipating, doesn't go the way of the 40 million, but more importantly also that there is some idea, even just simply idea, as to the scheduling of those road repairs.
Prime Minister, in relation to Phase 2, you know, many of us could go to town on the submissions that we are likely to make. So perhaps if you give us some idea as to what the budget will be like right now. Very well, very well.
Madam Speaker, if I may, Prime Minister, first of all, congratulations on this urban renewal program. A question, you laid out a menu of projects that we could use. Will there be other on the menu so that members of Parliament who have creative ideas, for example, doing a mural in an urban space, if we could submit those for the approval of the unit, or the menu is hard and fast?
Last question.
Town and Montego Bay. That is really what is classified in some policy statements as urban, based on how hang on, based on how some people define in terms of how persons are living, the kinds of dwellings, etc. I just want you to define what that is. And the second question is, when you remove the zinc fences, what are you proposing, or what are you proposing MPs should do? Because block and steel is expensive with concrete, and you will also have to take into consideration drainage. So you're talking about doing a long stretch of road when in fact that 4 million might just be able to do a few yards or a few chains. So I think we just need to be very realistic in here so that when it gets out, people are very, very clear on the parameters of what this program should look like. But it is a good program. I welcome the program, and I also want you to try and say to persons who are in the rural areas what that kind of renewal, since it's urban, would look like. So for example, if my constituency, for example, needs painting in the town of Claremont, or do I need to help a place in Parrytown, what could that be used for, since we might not have as much zinc as a facade in some areas, but people need zinc on the top of their roofs, or may need zinc on their farms to help with chicken coops, etc. So everything can't be homogeneous is what I'm asking.
Thank you, members, for your questions. And the questions are very helpful in refining the program as you ask them. We do come to the Parliament with a definition of the program, but your experience, your insights, I will take them and try as best as possible to ensure that members of Parliament are accommodated, because our circumstances differ, and some differ significantly, and the objective is to help the constituency. All right, so let me start with the member for Southeast St. Anne. The definition that we go by wouldn't be the classification on the electoral side of things, because that would be a very narrow number of constituencies. What we go by would be, first of all, the existence of a rural township. So if you have a township in your constituency, that is considered to be an urban area. If you have, so almost all constituencies would have some form of an urban space. Then you would want to consider what is defined as urban under the various municipal acts. And then you would want to look at developments that have sprung up where they are on a grid in terms of the roads crossing each other. The density is high, and there would be common infrastructure, sewage, water, central infrastructure. And so that is what we're looking for. Now, you wanted to know that what could you do in your rural township, for example, with $4 million. The project facilitates and conceives that in a rural township, you may need to reinstate the sidewalks. Some rural townships still have drainage on the side where you may need to create that kind of drainage. So sidewalk drainage, that would be acceptable. You may need to reinstall, for example, road signs. That is accommodated. There may be some infrastructure that you want to look at, such as walls, that might be necessary for the beautification of the town. There may be someone with a private property, but the fencing is unsightly. The program does not specify block and steel. It does prefer the use of a concrete solution. So block and steel is one form of a concrete solution, but you could have a pour in place. You could have a combination of pour in place and other forms of fencing, including wood and metal. What we would want is for the structure to be sturdy and sustainable. So the department, the Urban Renewal Department, will work with you to come up with something that makes sense for your area and the budget that is there. We concede up front that you will not be able to do long stretches, but we want you to select impactful projects. So you would look very closely in your constituency to see how you can make an impact with the funds that have been given. Remember, we are stretching it by including all constituencies, but not all constituencies actually have a high level of urban areas that would qualify. Now, the member from St. Mary Western asked about whether or not the project definitions are fixed. In this phase, we thought it best to fix the project, because when the project types are too vague or too many, when they come for review by the Auditor General or even us in the PAAC, sometimes they raise questions about the impact of the project, the cost benefit of the spend. So we try to have definitions. Now you mentioned, member, you mentioned murals. In this phase, we're not contemplating murals. What we will do in the phase coming, we may contemplate that. But in this phase, we would want to focus on projects where the works can be objectively assessed. If you paint a mural, you can paint anything, and you may not be able to judge and assess the value of the mural relative to the work. So we want to try and avoid those issues. So we tend to want to approve works that can be objectively assessed, meaning that you want to draw a tape measure on it, and there's a set rate and a set measurement. There can be no argument about these matters.
Prime Minister, as you
not in good order at all, member.
Huh?
Not in good order at all, member.
I asked the Prime Minister to accede so we have no latitude?
No, the speaker is whom you would need to approach.
Okay, sorry. But in this case, because I'm not, it's not the standing order, I have to ask the Prime Minister.
I actually took the last question, and if you would like to have further clarification,
it's a clarification.
One would expect that you would address the speaker.
It's a clarification. Thank you, Madam Speaker. And you're correct, but I have to ask the Prime Minister if he mind on a point that he was discussing.
You may go ahead, member.
Yeah. Well, yeah, thank you. But Prime Minister, so I agree that you have to pay careful attention to the monitoring and evaluation. Let me ask you, first of all, I want to thank you for the initiative and responding. But precisely because, as you recognize, it's a start, is there flexibility in the program to partner with other stakeholders, civil society, the church, in working to expand a program? And I gave an example. I just had a discussion with a sponsorship group that wants to help in a particular community. A program like this it's not big enough on its own to be very impactful, but together with that sponsorship group can really make a significant impact. So if I were to, identifying the project and defining it, identify the institution that wants to work with so that we can have a very impactful program in the same community and for the same purpose.
So, member, just to answer your question very quickly, I don't see why we would not be willing to partner with entities that have similar missions. The challenge, of course, is that we must be able to account for the funds that we have put in and what I have announced here in Parliament. So as long as those two parameters are not in any way compromised, in other words, the funds that we have allocated, we must be able to measure and account for it, and it must be used in the way in which we have defined it here. Outside of that, I wouldn't have any challenge. The ministry would be willing to look at a possible delay in implementation to allow for the coordination with an outside entity. But outside of that, the project should stick to what is announced here and be accountable for the funds. The question...
Madam Speaker, through you, Madam Speaker, I just wanted to remind the Prime Minister that he had not addressed the comments that I had made in terms of just the timing of the program and making sure that it's not announced now and months later.
No, I'm coming.
Oh, you're coming? Okay, thank you.
So, Madam Speaker, the member from Southwest St. Andrew, my sister and neighbor, pointed out that there are several projects which the government has announced, which funding has been approved for, but these projects have not yet been implemented. Madam Speaker, I thank the member for raising the issue because it is a concern on the minds of all MPs, and their constituents have been very vocal in demanding answers. Madam Speaker, the short answer is that we have 360 procurements that have to be undertaken for the projects that are in the NWA. These would be 360 additional projects. And, Madam Speaker, we have not expanded the staffing, especially in the procurement department of the NWA. So you can imagine that the bureaucracy to deliver, and this, Madam Speaker, is not, I mean, there is a, people would want to put blame at the feet of the NWA, and maybe there is blame to be put there, but the truth is, Madam Speaker, that our system that we have created, we have put on these laws which are necessary for accountability and necessary to ensure integrity of the process, that we have to perfect them, we have to carry them through and follow them through. And it means that it will elongate the process of implementation and delivery. Because, yes, but the issue, Madam Speaker, is that whilst the member will stand here and ask, why is it taking so long? If anything were to go wrong, the same member who is a member of the PAAC would probably be the first to interrogate, scrutinize, and accuse. So the government has no choice but to follow through. But a part of the problem as well is that there could be strategic ways which would be in keeping with our procurement law that would accelerate the process, which could be, for example, having framework agreements or having all the contracts clustered. But the truth is, Madam Speaker, that all MPs would want to have a certain level of control over the works that is happening in their area. And they would want to, and for good reason, some MPs, by virtue of the performance of some contractors, would prefer to have particular contractors operate in their areas. And so, Madam Speaker, Madam Speaker, anyway, but the points are that we have had to splinter the contracts. There are 360 contracts by virtue, just the nature of it. And these contracts, Madam Speaker, when they are implemented, will have a major impact on our local roadways. But this is not the subject of, of this presentation. But to answer the member's direct question, which is, will this be elongated? If you notice, Madam Speaker, we have strategically placed the value of the contracts at a particular threshold, which means that more expedited procedures can be applied to ensure that these projects get done and the benefit is delivered to the people in the constituency. So this is under a particular threshold, and therefore it can be expedited quickly. Madam Speaker, the question was asked about what would the phase 2 project look like and what would be the budget. We're still putting together that budget, but the phase 2 project will do what the leader of the opposition had mentioned, that there are constituencies that have housing developments. Some of these housing developments are not under the NHT or the HAJ. Some of them were built by the housing department at the time, Ministry of Housing. And so they don't really have a parent body that is overseeing them. They were social housing, they were given or sold or let to the persons occupying them, and they have now reached their useful life. Some of these houses were built, they were built to last 50 years. Some of them are over 50 years now. Not that they're going to collapse, but if they are not addressed, they probably will cause harm to the people occupying them. So in the second phase, we're going to be looking at several of these communities. Now already we have asked the NHD to take on a few of them, a few of the larger ones, and they are working on those. Several MPs in here will be benefiting from that. But there are some smaller communities and particular buildings that need attention. So in the second phase, we'll be looking at that. We'll be making a special budgetary allocation and looking at that. We will be also expanding the removal of zinc fences and dangerous properties. This era might be a little tricky because the properties may exist on, the buildings may exist on private property, but the truth is where these buildings form a public hazard, we have to engage a legal process and the local authority and see to their removal for the safety of the public. There are several communities where we have to reinstate the sidewalk, continue with zinc fence removal, establishment of proper parks for the communities. So it will really be very much urban focused, including where possible correcting sewage problems that may exist. So it will be fairly substantial and highly focused on urban problems and therefore urban communities. Madam Speaker, I think I would have answered all the questions asked. I thank members and I thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Announcements.
Also laid on the table of the House today are 1. Government of Jamaica National Natural Disaster Risk Financing Policy, White Paper number 2 of 2023, dated June 2023. And 2, the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Policy and Guidelines for Public Facilities, specifically for schools and hospitals, dated June 2023, from the Ministry of Science, Energy, Telecommunications and Transport.
House Leader, adjournment. House Leader, adjournment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So, Madam Speaker, at this point, it is not contemplated for us to do any further business today. But I'd like to use the opportunity to thank the members for coming out to Parliament at such short notice. And so, on the adjournment at this time, I therefore ask that the House adjourns until Tuesday, July 4, 2023 at 2 p.m.
The question is that the House do now adjourn for our next meeting date of Tuesday, July 4, 2023 at 2 p.m. sharp. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. This Honorable House now stands adjourned.
I was raped at the age of 9 by my stepfather.